All right, here we go again with Winston Churchill speeches, number two. This one's quite long. We're still in 1916, a few months later, debating in the House of Commons about World War I. So here we go. At one end of our military system, we have the country yielding willingly, though not without great difficulty, inconvenience, real hardship, much dislocation and risk, its whole manhood, its last reserves, or almost its last reserve, including men who have hitherto been kept back in some cases through very good reasons, but who must now go in spite of their reasons. You have that at one end of your military system. At the other end, you have a comparatively, I would almost say an astonishingly small proportion of war-worn soldiers who compose the fighting battalions, and they are heavily burdened, severely tried, and short-handed, who go back again and again, month after month, almost year after year. And between these two, you have an enormous multitude of khaki figures, collected with great difficulty, maintained at heavy expense, the greater part of them willing and eager to take part in the war, but through want of management or organization or defective organization are prevented from being useful either in industry or in the field. That is the broad outline of my case, and it is so important that I am bound to press it and labor it in bringing it before the House of Commons. What is the proportion of rifle strength to ration strength? The Undersecretary said euphemistically that there was some disparity between ration and rifle strength, and there always must be. Let us see what it is a little more closely. I shall keep on very broad and general lines in this respect, but I think it is absolutely necessary that the House and the country should follow the main outlines of Army organization. After all, the electorate and the honorable members who represent it ought to be as familiar with the details of Army organization as we used to be in peacetime with the details of any old political controversies here. Broadly speaking, I believe the following to be correct. I am speaking very broadly, allowing large margins for everything I say. Half the total ration strength of the British Army is at home, and half abroad. Of the half abroad, half of it fights, and half does not fight. Of the half that fights, about 3/4 fights as infantry in the trenches and in the assaults, and nearly all of the losses fall on them. It is 3/4 of the half, and the other quarter may consist of the artillery and other services who come under fire and who render the most effective service against the enemy, but who do not suffer to anything like the same extent. In other words, on this calculation, which is a very liberal one, very much on the other side, for every 5 men who are taken from the nation at one end, I would almost say out of every 6 men who are taken from the nation at one end, 1 effective infantry rifle is produced over the parapet of the other end. I think it's parapet. 2 bold conclusions may be drawn, which I will submit to the committee. First of all, that the number and proportion of those who actually fight ought to be greatly raised, and that it should be greatly raised by a comparatively small addition to the total aggregate. And secondly, that so far as possible, able-bodied men, and especially young men employed in all those other much more numerous parts of the military organization, ought to take their turn at the front, and not leave it to the same lot to go on continuously, and come back wounded time after time until they are finally knocked out. In my own experience, it happened to my battalion to receive a draft of 35 men, out of which 26 had been previously wounded, some of them very severely wounded, and this at a time when you can see with your own eyes going about this country that there are millions of men here and elsewhere who have never yet heard the whistle of a bullet. There are more than 1 million, at any rate, I should think more than 2 millions, of men who have not heard the whistle of a bullet. I will tell the House the story of the 9th Scottish Division. This division was the premier division of Scotland, the first division of the new army to be raised by Scotland at the beginning of the war. In the Battle of Loos, this division, with the other Scottish division, the 15th, played a very notable part. Out of the 9,500 infantry who advanced to attack the 6,000 were killed and wounded in the battle. Some of the battalions lost 3/4 of their strength, but nearly all succeeded in achieving the task which was set them of gaining the positions. some of the most important positions, and they were only lost when they were subsequently handed over at a later stage to other troops. One battalion of this division, a battalion of officers, the battalion of the Cameron Highlanders, who went into action about 850 strong. 30 officers, the colonel, the Cameron of Lochel, the adjutant, and 110 men, the survivors alone out of that 850, took and held the objective which they were set to take. 4 successive lines were swept away, but the 5th line went on without the slightest hesitation. With these troops shattered in the first day's battle, the remnant of 1,200, collected out of the brigade of 4,000, were asked 2 days afterwards to make another attack, and they went over the parapet and renewed the attack with the utmost elan and good spirit. You talk about the charge of Balaclava, and the charge of Fusiliers at Albura, but those deeds pale before the deeds which have been done by the new divisions raised in the British Army. There can be no justification for retaining great masses of troops in this country either in divisional formations or as coast watchers. A reasonable provision must be made for a mobile and central force. That is a matter, of course, entirely for the executive, but for the rest, cannot the volunteers be made to play their part in subsidiary duties, and release men of military age wherever they may be found for the purpose of supplementing the fighting battalions? To sum up, I submit to the government, which has absolute power in all these matters, for, after all, the House of Commons has very little power and can only place matters before the administration, that with a proper use of our resources and manpower, it would be possible immediately to raise all fighting units to full strength. It would be possible in a few months to raise all infantry battalions in the field to 1,200 strong, thus adding at a stroke 40% or 50% to the rifle strength. And at the same time, it would be possible to arrange for a regular system of rotation. I do not say a universal system, but a regular, instituted system of rotation by which every young man, so far as possible, took his share with the fighting battalion, and every worn-out soldier had a turn to rest. Next year, it would be possible, with a proper use of our resources, if the military situation renders it necessary, and if you look far enough ahead and act in time, to increase the scale of our military operations, and either to add an extra infantry brigade to each division, or to embark upon that greater risk, which we must not exclude from the possibility of practical politics, of raising the total number of divisions from 70 to the ideal at which we should aim of 100. We cannot survey the field of war today without profound realization of the magnitude of the task before us. The continuing power of the enemy, which I mentioned on another occasion, on every front, is proved to us by every telegram that comes in. We feel ourselves grappling with the most terrible foe that ever menaced freedom. Our whole life energies are required. We are trying our best, but we are at present developing the full results of the great effort made by the nation. No one who subjects the present organization of the Army, either in the field or at home, to searching and dispassionate scrutiny, can believe that every measure to that end is being taken at the present time. I yield the floor.